Do you remember when the war began and you first heard that there were children being turned into soldiers?
Well, the war in Sierra Leone began in 1991, but before that, there had been a war in Liberia, so we had started seeing a flow of refugees coming into the country, and they would tell stories like we began to see in the war, but we would never believe them. We would just be like, it's impossible that people could do this to each other.
This is great. Thank you for coming. And I understand reading the book that you're a reggae guy, Bob Marley. Is that right?
Yes, I am a big reggae guy. I grew up on reggae music.
How did that work in Sierra Leone? Did you have cassettes? What was it where did you hear the music?
Well, Sierra Leone has a lot of sort of Caribbean culture that came through our history as well. Slaves returning from the Caribbean. So you grew up with a lot of reggae music. So my early memories were listening to reggae music and Bob Marley and things like that. So after the war, it actually became a way to connect back to when things were normal, So I know all those songs and stuff from before, yeah.
So We Be Jammin' is...
Absolutely, we'll be jamming, yeah.
Was that something that as a child that kind of kept your music, was that part of keeping your sanity through that all, or a consistent thing?
Well, I think there was something about growing up. There was not a love for if you went to school and you told your parents that you were interested in the arts, they would pull you out of school and send your brother because they thought this guy is not going to succeed in life.
Yeah.
But there was a love for music, there was a love for culture, for arts, for Shakespeare and things like that. So as a kid growing up, I think these were ways for me to travel outside of my environment. I grew up in a very remote part of the country, but with the cassettes, with the Run DMCs, with the Bob Marley, with the LL Cool J's, with all this different music that came through foreigners that were there, I was able to travel outside, and even through literature. I remember the first thing I read was what is it called? Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Yeah. One of my teachers read it when I was in primary school, and I was playing Jim Hawkins in the thing. So art has always been a way, music, whether through music or literature, for me to move imaginatively out of the space that I inhabited, and that allowed me to survive a lot of things.
Did you, was school readily available to you when you were growing up? And by the way, just for the camera, where were you born?
I was born in Sierra Leone, in West Africa. I was born in a place called Matrujon, which is in the south. And I grew up in a village called Mogwemo, which is very remote. Most people in Sierra Leone don't even know that it exists.
You're very young looking. What year were you born?
I was born in 1980, so I'm becoming a very old man.
Oh, you only knew. So you're 1980, and at that point, when you're in kind of grade school, 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, Were things going on in Sierra Leone? Were you aware of any sort of governmental activities going on, or were you so remote you just didn't matter?
Well, to be honest, in the beginning, it didn't matter at all because I grew up in a place where the capital city was like this thing far away where the government existed and nobody cared because at the time the country was quite functional. One of the things in Sierra Leone at the time was that we had a great educational system, the British model. So it didn't matter where you grew up, you had access to school. You may not have access to the materials, but there was a great educational system. So even in my small village, I went to school, we had excellent teachers. I was reading Shakespeare and all these things, right? So, but later on in my year, when maybe I was 8, 9 years old, I began to experience what was going on in the political scene, which is that there was a scarcity of food because there was a price control that had come about and that wasn't done properly. So that's the first time I ever really understood through adult stocking and then having to go with my father in the forest to buy rice very, very late at night. Whereas we could get that at a shop before. That's when I began to see that things were changing. But before that, I didn't really know about government or what.
What did your dad, was he politically active at all in the little small town? What did he do for a living?
My father was not political. My father was, he had gone to university for 1 year and he has studied something along the lines of chemistry and physics. And so he worked for an American-Australian mining company that was mining minerals in that part of the country. It's called Sierra Rutai. So that was my father. So he was not politically active, but my father was always reading books. Because he worked for this mining company, I guess some of the people who came had these books that they would throw out when they were moving out, and he would collect them, very old books, and he would just read them. It didn't matter what they were. And so I would ask him questions. Well, why are you sitting there reading? What is it that you're reading? He would tell me whatever it is that he was reading, and he would tell me a new word and things like that. You know, so that's how it was. Yeah.
How many kids in your family?
There were 3 of us. I was the second born, and I were boys. So we also grew up in an environment where there was no very much room for emotion. You know, as an African man, you're not supposed to show emotion. You grow up with your father, you're not supposed to show any emotion. So it's like something is going on with you, figure it out. You don't have to. So I think, in retrospect, that had its disadvantages, but during the war, it helped me to succeed a little bit.
So, and your mother, talk about your mother.
My mother, my family separated when I was very little, so I grew up with my father, but my mother was not educated. She was a market woman, which meant that she sold fish and small ingredients like pepper, salt in the market, and that was basically it. Yeah.
So, as you're growing up and all of a sudden there's a sense that there is civil unrest in Sierra Leone, how did you first get to know that? How did you appreciate that was going on?
Well, how I learned about the unrest was that in the beginning there was a war starting in neighboring Liberia. So we will hear about it on the BBC radio, and we will see refugees running from that conflict coming. And Liberia and Sierra Leone share common languages and tribes, so people spoke like us, so they talked about what had happened. We did not believe them. Then when the war started in the eastern part of my country in the early 90s, the same thing happened. People would come and they would tell about how their houses had been burned down, their kids had been recruited in the fighting, people had been gunned down in their villages. We did not believe it because imagine before that, this was a place where I grew up, where I would walk 6-7 miles to my grandmother's village by myself. I was 6-7 years old. In my imagination, there was nothing to fear. I didn't fear anything. I would just walk.
Right.
If night came upon me, somebody would keep me in the next village and they would send word to whoever was walking that way to tell them, your son is here, he's sleeping, don't worry, he'll come back tomorrow. So for people to come and say what the violence that was occurring was too much. You know, we just could not believe it until it actually reached me. Later on, when I was about 12 years old, that I started to really understand what it is that I'd been hearing about.
How did it reach you? How did it get to you?
We had, basically the war came, the rebels came and attacked the town, and I had been in another town with my older brother. We were into American hip-hop music. So we're doing these talent shows. We are going to a talent show, and the war reached my town. We tried to go back to see if we can find our families. And we just were seeing this onslaught of people coming against us. Wounded, some carrying their dead children in their arms, and that's basically the first day that I experienced really what this war was about. And then from that day on, I started running from it, near-death experiences, getting Then I got recruited into the war, so it just got worse from that day on.
So walk me through some of that experiences, which is your book, which is A Long Way Gone, which is unbelievable. You did such a fantastic job of.
Thank you.
So congratulations. So give me a chronology of what happened to you when you finally you got this knowledge base. I know you started a sort of a journey to avoid it, and things happen.
Yeah, I mean, when war reaches you, your parents, I don't think, are really sitting you there and preparing you and telling you, hey man, when the war comes, this is what you do, because they're not expecting this would happen. So all of a sudden, we started seeing this war, and we're running from it, trying to find our families. Other young people were doing the same thing, and you learn things along the way.
It's a process.
Yeah, it's a very strategic process. They know that if they destroy communities, young people are restless, they want to belong to something. And they also know that young people have lost everything. Communities, families, they want some kind of structure. So they create a false sense of that belonging, right? And also they tap into the hurt. You want justice. You just lost your family, had been killed. You want somebody to be responsible. And they say to you, well, if you join us, you can make sure that this doesn't happen to other people, but also you can find those people who are responsible and take revenge. At this point, that sounded good to everybody.
Right.
And after all of this, you don't have a choice. There's a coercion. They let you know if you don't believe and you want to leave, we'll kill you. And you do what we want to do. Lastly, you've watched, as you've been running from this war, as a young boy, you've seen things around you. Or as a young girl, you've seen that to live, to buy a day, a minute, a second in this environment requires being part of some group. Otherwise, you become prey to everybody, and your life can be taken away from you any minute. So as a way, you embrace this new community, which requires violence to be part of, and it becomes your life. And also, when they recruit young people, they are not vying for political office. When you recruit young people, they're not thinking, well, I want to be the minister of that if you win the war. They just want to belong. They're disposable, nobody claimed their lives, their families are dead, so this becomes the best army you can have. They don't care about their own lives. That's really what they do.
So, what was the name of this group?
We didn't have a name, we were just referred to as the Sierra Leone Army. We were called the Sierra Leone Army, which was an easy way to say that we were the good guys. But as everyone knows, in war, nobody's a good guy. Everybody will claim that, well, we're better than the next guy, because, I've been in war and I've fought in war. The idea of it, the naked truth of it, is you kill other people. That's it. In order for you to survive, you kill other people. Somebody can do it, but the rest of it is just explanations. And that does something to your humanity. That messes you up. That people have PTSD. That's the reason why they do. Because when you dehumanize somebody else, in reverse, you dehumanize yourself. Plain and simple. Whatever the explanations are, there have been wars in history that have been fought for good reasons, but the soldiers on the ground will still have problems because the nature of it, it's not, put it lightly, it's not pleasant, it's inhumane.
You're thinking, of course, you're in mind's eye, you're the good guys. You're going to save the country.
Absolutely.
Who are the bad guys?
Everybody else is the bad guy.
Yeah.
Whatever we did was justified, We were revenging for the death of our families, and by doing that, we were making sure that what had happened to us would not happen to other people. So this is a very, very admirable moral thing. I mean, according to the commanders, I bought into it at the time that I was there, so were other people. And also you get to have a sense of power. Now you realize these are countries where most people grow up not having a sense of any kind of power as a human being. And all of a sudden, you're part of a fighting group, you have a gun, you can decide who lives or die. You can scramble after the limited resources that are available. You can take over a whole village and have a house to sleep. You never had a room to yourself before. You can loot whatever you wanted. All these things become a sense of power because you've never tasted what it meant to be in charge of your life. And all of a sudden you feel there's an illusion of it. And people will kill to be part of that illusion. That's the naked truth.
So in order to get your head to that level, I mean, not only they talk to you, but you got reading about cocaine and marijuana, and that seemed to be a very thought through process of getting you into that numbness or frame of mind where you didn't have a moral compass.
Well, absolutely. Everybody thinks, just like it is in regular military, when you show up at one of these places, they don't just hand you an AK-47 with the bullets in it and say, let's fight. You could shoot them for all you care, Yeah. So they have to get your mind the way they want it for them to be able to give you that weapon, and they know that you're going to do whatever they want you to do. They have to mold you into that. They have to create. So to cope with that requires drugs, requires, people drank alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, brown, different kinds of drugs that you became addicted to. These also become a reason to fight, because they say, well, we have it in the other town. If we attack it, you can have it. So that becomes another reason. You also join with a group of kids that have become family because you've ran and suffered with them. Right. So sometimes you fight for the guy standing next to you. Just like in regular militaries, you take an ordinary guy, you train them to be a soldier, you basically undo them and you redo them the way you want, right? Right. It's the same concept. The only thing is that here is done in the midst of madness. So you can see the blood, you can smell it, and it's quicker. That's basically it. To make a soldier, you have to basically teach them how to follow orders and not ask questions. Because otherwise, if you leave a human being to their own faculties untapped, they would not engage in the time of things that devastate humanity. They would ask, but why are we doing this? You don't want soldiers like that. It doesn't matter what type of war, because you can't fight a war if you have soldiers who ask moral questions and say, hey man, but at the end of the day, it becomes the fact that you want to survive, you want to live, you want the guy standing next to you to live. You got to do whatever it takes.
You kind of rose up the ranks. You actually became a lieutenant, or?
Yes, I did. But there's also competition, you are in there and you realize that, if I adhere to command, I do the things I needed to do, I will rise between these ranks, and therefore I will just become a foot soldier, which means that I'll have access to certain things. I would have my own group that I command. This is also the level of power. So I rose up to that, I guess maybe I was a smart guy before the war. I went to school, I had certain ways of dealing with other people, and I did that,
Do you think some of the education you had early on, the British sort of, I don't know if maybe you've been asked this question, but you're a well-educated man. You're well-educated early on. The British system sort of made sure you got educated, and then were you able to use some of those skill sets to kind of survive?
Well, I think having an education and knowing that I knew certain things, and that it created the possibility of hope, for me. I think that's what it did. And other people were educated. One of my commanders, for example, was a big fan of Shakespeare. So some nights he would read Shakespeare things to us in the middle of this madness, And so everybody was coming from different backgrounds. There's some people who had never been in school, but I think when you had a little bit of education, if you had a little bit of education like I did, it meant that you came from a family that cared enough to send you to school to start with, which means that you had a little bit of stability, however it was in your family, that there was some kind of threshold of being loved, however form it was. You had a sense of community, you had a sense of some slight purpose in your life. So therefore, these things are always a basis to go back to be able to spring up. Kids who did not have any of these, who were born in the war, it was too difficult to form one in the context of the war. So I think that allowed me to get along. That allowed me to also be excellent in the way I was doing and the things that I was doing. That allowed me to know strategies, to memorize strategies, to be in charge of certain things, perhaps to intimidate other recruits, who knows,
I don't think I read, and I don't think I ever thought about it till now, but were there, your boys, obviously boy soldiers, and they were boy soldiers, were there any women soldiers?
Oh, there were girls. There were lots of girls. When I was writing my memoir a long way ago, and I made a deliberate choice not to write about the girls. Okay. Because I felt that it was not my story and my place to tell that story, because there are soldiers that suffered like us, but they also have the sexual part of it. They become wives and commanders, So I felt that I could not do justice to that story, so I decided to leave it out. And I hope that a girl who actually lived it will write it. So that's why I did not mention that. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Did you know at the time that you were in this army that your two brothers and parents had passed away? Did you know that?
Yes, that's part of the reason why I went to the army base for safety, because I felt I'd lost everything and that there was no reason for me to live. And this is also part of the reason why kids who have often become good soldiers, because you have nothing to lose. Right. You become the most deadly soldier when you don't fear death, when you don't care about your life anymore. You become a very good soldier because you're not thinking about going home, you're not thinking about anything, you're just basically thinking about causing more harm. At the time you believe you're solving the issue, obviously, but in retrospect, no, they are not.
At the time that group from UNICEF kind of intercepts you and involves you. Did you know how the war was going? Were you have any degree of successes? You were obviously alive, but did you know whether you were winning or losing the war?
Well, the thing is, every group will never tell you that they are losing the war. No group will accept.
Sure.
That's the military, no. So in my camp, we were winning the war. And I would say that in my camp, we were also taking several bases. Some ambushes, some attacks, we did not succeed. But the morale was always that the commander would tell us we're succeeding, we're pushing, we're winning the war, our order, you know. Because otherwise you can't, the morale drops down and people will want to run away or maybe abandon. So we're always winning and we're always the right people doing the right thing, you know. But at some point after the war, you begin to put it together, you realize that the same rhetoric that had been used to other kids who fought in other groups, they had been told the same thing. They just had a different commander. So we must have been in any of the other groups.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the madness of war. Everybody's a good guy. Why do you think all of the rebel groups around the world, all of the crazy people, they all have fancy names? Revolutionary United Fronts, People Liberation Army. Nobody really says what they do, you know, because that name would be different, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody has a lofty, because you kind of want to convince the people that are fighting that this is something worth fighting for. However crazy it is, maybe in that context, but at the end of the day, it's not, you know.
Why was there an intervention by UNICEF? How did UNICEF sort of integrate and get to you? And here you are, you're at an army base, you're with an army group, and then the folks from the United Nations somehow got involved. How did that happen?
Well, I didn't know the answer to this question, how UN got involved in UNICEF in particular, for a number of years until I became a UNICEF ambassador and started working with them and going into some of the environments where they do this work to witness how they do. So basically how they work is that when there's an ongoing war, at some point either the warlords or the different commanders would express interest in a peace deal, which means that they are interested in politics. They want to be a minister or the commander in some, you know. And so then the United Nations say to them, well, if you want to be taken seriously in the international scene, you need to show respect for human rights principles. One of them means releasing children from your fighting, releasing women, stop raping, so that you can have clean human rights record. We can start cleaning it. Otherwise, nobody's going to take you seriously. So then what happens is that they sign an action plan with this organization that allow them to come in and verify the number of kids they have in their ranks and try to remove them from the fighting and put them in psychosocial centers and start this process. So it's a kind of a caveat that they give them. And also, if you want to disband your group, you have a rebel group, you want the DDR to happen for the adults, you know, then you have to give them something as well. So this is how they come in. And so it's not like the commanders are just decided one day, well, such good people are going to let the kids go. There's something in it for them.
Right.
And so when the workers come, then they verify to see who is under 18. If you look like you're under 18, chances are you'll be released. But even that is always debatable, particularly if you're a foot soldier, if you're a combatant, as opposed to like a cook or something, you know.
What did you think when this was happening? Here you had dedicated your many years to this army, to your commanding officer, and then somehow he permits you to go.
I was very upset. I was not one of those kids who was looking to escape, because where was I going to go? I was not one of those kids who thought that, oh, the UN come to save me. I didn't even know who they were. And I felt upset, but I'd also been used to adhering to command, where if I was told, do this, I did it. So I went, though I was very cautious, because the only thing that bothered me was the fact that these were civilians. Why would my commander give me in the hands of civilians who don't have any weapons? I knew they wouldn't be able to protect me. I saw the world differently from them. I had different instincts from them. So that bothered me a lot. So, but slowly I got to understand what that meant when I went to the center. It took time to understand that this meant to have another life besides war, which I'd come to believe that was the entirety of my life at this point.
There's a rehabilitation center nearby, or how far was it from your base?
Quite far, which, I mean, the roads were bad, so probably if the roads are good, it would take you 1 hour or 2 hours. But because the roads were bad, it took us maybe 6-7 hours to get to the outside of the capital city, where the rehabilitation center was, and then that's where I started the new life.
Was that hard?
Very difficult. Actually, being in the war, I'd gotten so used to it, it was tolerable. Because when you're in the war, there are no distractions in the sense that you don't allow your mind to take over, because you're fighting, you're doing drugs, you're in an ambush, you're doing this, you're always moving, so you distract yourself, you're taking drugs. But then when you're no longer fighting, that's why PTSD is very dangerous. Your mind becomes your worst enemy. You are left with your mind, and everything that you've seen, you've done, you've been a part of, begins to take hold of you. So this was actually the most difficult, because there's nothing I could do. So this center waiting for God knows what, and that sort of just killed me completely, and it was very hard, very, very difficult.
So you were there for how long?
I was at the center for about 6 months, which is unusual because at the time we were one of the first few waves of kids released, so there's a lot of funding still to keep kids as long as possible at centers. But when there's no funding, usually you take a month or less, and they put you into a family setting. But I stayed there for 6 months. And even within those 6 months, I didn't learn how to really function. Even when I left, I still continued the psychosocial therapy, because I had to learn how to function as a kid again, which was not completely entirely possible anymore, because I was thinking like an adult. I was thinking like a soldier. I saw the world like a soldier. I did not see the world as a kid. I had not known, all my naivety had gone away. You know, I saw strategy. I saw danger around the corner. I was observing people in ways that my peers did not even think about in their widest imagination. So it was hard.
You were 16 at the time?
Yeah, I was 16 at the time, yeah.
Was detox part of that? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Detox was hard because just at a center where you had no access to anything, alcohol, drugs, and there was a withdrawal period that was really harsh, you know. That coping mechanism wasn't there. So again, your mind took hold of you. You saw flashbacks. Tried to sleep, you couldn't sleep because you dreamt about the thing, so then you develop insomnia. And sometimes they had to give us injections so that we can sleep, because it was good for just the body. Sometimes you just couldn't do it, you know.
So after that 6 months, then did they send you to your uncle?
Yes, what they do is that when you're at the center, they do what is called family tracing. They try to see if any of the family members is still alive. And whoever they could find who's willing to take you, they talk to them and convince them that it's the best interest of a child to be part of a family unit. So my uncle, they found him. I knew of my uncle, but I never met him.
Right.
And so then I went to live with him and his family. Now in the capital city, the war hadn't reached the capital city. So there was a lot of stigma if you're a former child soldier living in the community, because people did not know the context of your life, how you ended up in war. They only saw you as a violent human being who destroyed the country. Now they've saved him and they think he's saved and he's only capable of violence. So when you live in a neighborhood, everybody was afraid of you. Anything went wrong, it was your fault.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Was it hard to get into society when people asked you, what did you do? I mean,
It was absolutely hard, particularly when people found out. Even when people didn't find out, just how people were, you know, like as a soldier, you can't just come and live in normal society. It's not possible. All your instincts are different from how people live their lives normally. So it's very hard to fit in. You know, your expectations are different, and at this point there was a lot of stigma. You know, I remember when I started going to school, preliminary schooling, when kids found out that we had been in war, myself and a few other former child soldiers, they would not sit next to us in classrooms because they were afraid that we would lose it and we would just kill everybody. And probably we were the only people who understood the true nature of violence and were trying to escape it, but that wasn't the perception we got from others, you know. So it was very hard to be accepted and to believe that you also have intelligence. Most people did not believe that you were capable of anything besides that violence, you know. So you had to not only survive that war and deal with the memory, you also have to convince people that that story is not the entirety of your life. It's part of who you are. But you're still a kid also trying to figure it out, you know. It was very difficult to do that.
I know you're writing a book about trying to have just conversations with women of the other sex. Just,
yeah.
You know, it was just, you couldn't open up.
No, I couldn't open up, and I think I'm still learning to open up. I've opened up quite a bit to my wife and, you know, and all that stuff. We have children and all that stuff, but it's very hard for me to also show emotion. Over the years I've worked on it. When you become a father, you can't just tell your daughter, I love you with no emotion. They won't believe you, you know. So I had to learn to do that. Or even your wife, that you love them, for them to agree to marry you is not gonna come with like a stoic nature, right? So, but it was very difficult for me to let people in. I think it wasn't because I was afraid of letting them in. Is that I just didn't think people would understand, and that if people didn't get to know you, that became the only way they knew you, and then that became the way they saw you and every one of your action. For example, the family that adopted me in the US, most of my mom's friends were so afraid of the fact that she had adopted me. They would call her in the middle of the night to check on her to see if she was okay, because they thought I would be in the house planning how to. First of all, why would I fly across the Atlantic Ocean and struggle so much to come and be adopted in the family just to go and stab them in the middle of the night? I was looking for a stable home, you know. It's like, but somehow people could not understand that, because what had happened to me was so abnormal in their world that there was no way a kid could function from this, you know. And here I was, so it was always quite difficult. So I kept it to myself for a long time, because I didn't like the stigma that came with it. I didn't like the way people were only willing to see one side of it, you know. Yeah.
So you meet this lady named Esther. She sees a good part of your book. What does she mean to you?
Well, Esther was one of the nurses who worked at the rehabilitation center, and she was one of the first adults that I started to trust after the war, because I think what was different about her was the fact that she saw me as a child. You know, one of the things as a child, when you come from any kind of violent situation, is that you learn to trust your instinct very deeply. You can tell when people are very genuine with you. And she was one of those people that was very genuine. She saw me just as a kid, not as a soldier. Even though I tried for her to see me as a tough soldier that I was, she just saw me as a kid who lost his way, a boy who needed love and care. And that really meant something to me, even though I didn't let her know, because then that would say that I was weak. And so that's how I started to trust her, and that's really what that meant to me. It was like I began to learn again that there were some people who were good in this world who had no bad intentions, you know.
Did you write music again?
I tried to write music again, yes. I wrote lyrics again. I learned to play the drums. I did different things. Yeah, I did. I didn't make a career out of it, but
Tonight you might be playing tonight.
I might make a career out of it tonight. My debut may come in.
So you write this book, A Long Way Gone. What inspired you to do that?
The inspiration to write the book came out of frustration, really. It came out of frustration with the fact that I'd survived this war. I was living in the United States. I was going to school, high school, then university. I was doing well in my classes. But there was this narrative going around about people like me who were called a lost generation, who were not supposed to be intelligent, who were supposed to only be capable of violence. And all the people who were drawing these conclusions had not actually met any of us. And so I got really frustrated by this and thought, you know, I need to put a human face to this experience so people have a real context from somebody who lived it. So that's how I started writing, with the intention of preparing myself for debates and dialogues that then turned into a book. So I never intended to publish it because it's too private, too personal. But then as I finished writing, I saw the need for it to be out there, for people to understand that you may have been in war as a child, you may have lost a thing, but that doesn't mean that you're not intelligent, that doesn't mean that you're not creative, that doesn't mean that if you're given a second chance in life, you will not do something with it. Really giving a real opportunity, not just to be a mechanic, or except if you want to be one, but you know, because when we were coming out of war, these were the things that were given to us. We were basically looked at as these people who were kind of idiots. That's basically what it was. In front of us, people would discuss our future without asking us. And we're looking at them, and some of them may think they may be in their 40s, 50s, but guess what? We'd experienced life more than they had. We knew the very carnal aspect of life. We also knew what peace meant. And we were sitting there looking at them thinking, why are they not asking us? Because we are not unrealistic individuals. Guess what? We've fought in war. We've commanded groups of other kids. You know, what 13-year-old, 12-year-old kid you know who can command other group of kids carrying weapons? Few kids can get other kids to behave on a playground. They don't have guns. They're in a very civilized environment. And here we were in the most horrible civil war. Some of us are commanding group, but yet when people talk to us, they talk to us like we were idiots, you know. Yeah. So that really was bothering me, and I was like, somebody's got to put some words to it. So I decided to try it out, and that is the product that came out of it.
Well, it obviously was well received. You're New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
Did that surprise you that all of a sudden you have a little bit of a celebrity?
It did surprise me actually. When I was writing this book, I obviously worked hard on it and wanted it to be an excellent book because I knew I was writing about a world that was very new to people, so I wanted to bring them in. So I did all the hard work and language and all the, things I could do to make a book accessible and the word accessible to people so they can feel, smell, hear. But never in my wildest imagination I thought it would be received the way it was received, because I thought it's also a difficult book, right? It talks about things that maybe some people don't want to know about, right? So I didn't know what would happen, but I thought to myself, if it came out and 5 people read it and it touched their lives, I was good with that.
Yeah.
But then even before it came out, it was already on the New York Times magazine. It was like, I didn't know what to do with it. I'm still a village boy at heart, I've gotten used to certain things, but it would completely caught me off guard. I didn't know what to do with it, and I'm glad it didn't get to my head, because that would have completely taken away the purpose of the book, And people did try to put me on the pedestal, but I always thought to myself, but that's not who I am, I'm glad that it did well. I'm glad it showed that I could write, and I went on to become a writer. I was very thankful for those things. But even though the story is about me, it's about an idea and a situation that's bigger than me. And I always wanted to make sure that that remained the central focus of it. And thankfully, I had people who surrounded me who were able to keep me in that line as well.
I don't know the answer to this question, but there's a lot of prosecutors here who were part of the Special Tribunal for Sierra Leone, covering these activities, covering Charles Taylor, Liberia, gold, blood diamonds. Was that subsequently? Did anybody ever reach out to you as being evidence or a potential witness, or was that ever part of your world?
Not necessarily. I mean, I did make friends with people who were in that world, because when I was also in university, I wanted to go to law school actually. So I studied international humanitarian law in undergraduate. I worked for the International Center for Transitional Justice. I followed closely the formation of the special court. So I was very interested in what was going on. But I never went to court for those things. I went to court in the US as a character witness for a former child soldier who had made it to the US, and the US government wanted to prosecute them. And so I became a character witness, and he won his case. So there was that. But then people like David Crane reach out to me and say, you need to come and talk to my law class at Syracuse, because I'm teaching them about the importance of this. I think they need to have hard evidence and meet people. So in that environment, yes, I made friends through that environment. I went to the Holocaust Museum. So there were places where for people to talk about human rights violations that are very current, that are also happening to people who are as young as people studying the concept of it to understand it. So that was more in the arena that I also took people to Sierra Leone to try and learn about the special court and things like that, to know what was going on. So yeah, there was some of that, but yeah.
Maybe there should be a photo op with, because we have so many Sierra Leone people here.
Yeah.
Ms. Bangura, have you met her?
Yes, of course. I've met Zainab, because I also am a UNICEF ambassador for children affected by war and conflict. So I've actually met Zainab in different. I was talking to her last time I saw her was in Central African Republic, which was a place that had fallen apart, and I was in some remote part of it doing witnessing a negotiation and release of children in armed groups, and she was coming off one of those UN helicopters to deal with the sexual violence of it. So we said hi to each other. Yeah. And it was the environment that few people managed to find themselves in, because most people go to nice warm Florida. We were in a place where there's like guys scoring RPGs while your plane is landing. That's not really a combination people can put together, No. So I've seen her in different environments. I've heard her speak, and there are also other people here that I've met before, because it's a small world of people who care enough to seek justice on behalf of others, or to think that this is not right, let's do something about it. The majority of the world kind of think that people are moral, people are right, and therefore it will just work itself out. But people have to put some work into it. Right. And the idea is that all these prosecutors here, once you've seen what happens in the world to a certain level, you cannot. I was talking to David Crane earlier. I was like, I retired from teaching. I was like, you're not really retired. You may not be teaching at Syracuse Law, but what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing something with Syria. I was like, you see, once you've seen certain parts of human nature, there's no way you can undo yourself and not make yourself useful to the world. You can't. You just possibly cannot do it, you know. So these people have become useful. You'll become useful to humanity until the end of their lives, you know.
So I know a bunch of students today got your book, and what's the message that you would like the students who, or anybody reads this, what's the message?
Well, the message of this book, there are several things, but first of all, I really wanted people to understand the context of violence, what it does to communities, how it changes a boy who wanted to become just a regular boy, how it changes their life, but also how they regain themselves. It's not impossible. But most importantly, I think it's really for people to understand the value of human life. All these international legal norms, laws, the idea behind it is to preserve that very sacrosanct nature of human life. And I think sometimes we get lost in the discussions of it, the technicalities of it. So I wanted to write a book very narratively driven to remind people that if you have a brother, you have a sister, you have a mother and a father, and they find themselves in this environment, wouldn't you want justice? Wouldn't you want something to be done? Wouldn't you want them to come out of it and be whole? Everybody will say yes, regardless of their political dealings or whether they're Republican, Democrat, or whatever. Everybody will say yes to it. So I wanted to bring people back to that very basic background of all of us in us. Everybody would do anything for their family. They would do anything to protect their community. You know, the rest is just fluff that happens along the way and we forget that, you know. So that's really what I hope people will open their eyes to see.
Now you've written books since then.
Yes, I have.
Talk about those.
I've written novels. You know, my first book was a non-fiction, but then I went on to write a second novel that was called Radiance of Tomorrow, that looked at returning to places that have been devastated. I just completed another book that looks at what it means, which is a novel, looks at what it means to be young in any given African country these days, kind of straddling between the lines of your own traditions and modernity. Where do you find yourself? How do you define freedom? So I'm always trying to introduce people to ideas and concepts, open a small window into a culture, but also for them to appreciate what their lives are. I live in the US, I'm a US citizen now, and living in this country, you sometimes take for granted the idea of freedom because you don't have to fight for it in the way other people have to fight for it elsewhere. So I also like to write things that remind people that we can't take these things for granted. It can be taken from us. We have to be active citizens. We have to participate in our freedom. Otherwise, somebody can just take it from us. We may not even know. You know.
So what are we going to hear tomorrow? You're going to give a speech, keynote address tomorrow. What's the topic?
Well, I mean, the topic here is along the dialogue is about, you know, that asking the questions whether the justice we seek is the justice they really want. You know, and I come from a country where there was a big question after the war, like what is justice? How do we achieve it? If we go after a few guys in the war, does that really serve the rest? So tomorrow I'm going to talk just from my generation's point of view, coming from that war, what that meant to us, to see how the trial was set up, how the politics of the special court and everything, because law is political, at least from my point of view. People can argue what they want, but it's always political to some extent, you know, and whoever makes that decision at some point decides which direction it's going to take. The public is either going to buy it or not. We already come from a place where we never believed in justice, and all of a sudden there was a sense of feeling wronged and then being prescribed a certain way of repairing that wrong, and people were like, well, wait a minute. For example, one of the biggest questions people asked was that how come there's so much precedent and so much due process in handling the guys who actually caused the problem than the victims? You know, Charles Taylor's rights were safeguarded. They made sure he had the best protections. He had representation, he had all that stuff, everything. So why so much money to, this is the biggest question people had in mind. Yeah. You know, it's just like, why can't we set precedents for victims then? If we have all this for, you know, these guys did not care when they were violating the rights of other people, knowing very well what it was. I'm not saying that we should violate their rights as an international criminal court, but I think the population should have an understanding about how that process works. And there should be a little bit of balance to understand what that does. You know, some of us were very disturbed the fact that Charles Taylor was not prosecuted in an African country, but rather he had to go all the way to The Hague, right, which cost a lot of countries a lot of money to keep him there. And that took so long for him to even step in court. So people were like, you know, What does that do for the perception of justice if it's done outside? It means that we can't handle it. Are we afraid of the guys who could? Can we show them we have a rule of law here, we're going to prosecute you here, and if you want to cause problems, we'll stop it as well? So there are all these questions that, you know.
It'd be great. I'll be anxious to hear all that. Well, you've been terrific. What's the question I should be asking you that people normally ask Ishmael Beah that I'm not asking? I haven't asked yet. What's the one I'm missing?
Well, what am I proud of in my life and things like that? I'm not proud of. Yeah, I'm happy that I'm a successful writer. I write great books that people want to read, and you know, and I do all these things. I'm thankful for that blessing, you know, and to have a voice. But I'm really thankful for been able to have the opportunity to have a family. I have a remarkable wife who loves me dearly, and I love her, and she's given me 3 remarkable children, twins, and you know, and these, and for me, these are the proudest things of my life, because I would have never imagined myself having that. I'm able to show love that I was never given, that I was denied. I'm able to feel it, to show people. I'm able to feel loved in a certain way. I'm able to go home and feel completely like this is my world, nothing else exists, you know. And I think these are human feelings that we all have, and I want people to understand that success, all of these things are remarkable. If you don't have people to share with, it doesn't mean much, really.
You're special. Thank you for sharing your time.
Thank you very much.